everybody, and welcome tonight to episode 5 of the ComYunity talk show. My name is Unitex, and today we are joined by Ave and Solly. How are you both doing this fine evening, sort of day that you've got going on?
Fantastic, as well as can be expected.
Yeah, sometimes I just keep forgetting that you're like not in the same time zone as we are.
Yes, I've got, a good third of the day left to go, so.
That's amazing. Well, I can tell you that the future is fine. Nothing has majorly happened in any capacity, so nothing major has changed in that respect. Right, so this episode 5, we're actually focusing in on a heavier topic, which is mental health. And we're going to tie it into our lives and also the gaming industry as well. But just an interesting point that Solly brought up before this actual episode is that there hasn't been, in fact, a lot of research done into mental health and video games. So it's very much lacking in that respect. Solly, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so just as a bit of background, I've sort of pursued looking into video games academically. I did my master's thesis around how, I can't remember the title actually, which is terrible, but it's how gamers view themselves compared to how the public might view them, and the background of that was very much violent video games. So in terms of research into the link between video games and health, there's very, very little, because classically the research has been around violence and the impact of violent video games, which is a very, very different thing than video games generally. And whilst that conversation, that dialogue has kind of been, what's the word I'm looking for, like that's petered out, I think we know all we can about it really, the research now seems to have skewed a bit more towards like video game addiction. Again, a very negative outlook on video games and what they provide to the communities that use them and things like that. So I thought actually an interesting question for me from an academic point of view is more, I'm not really that bothered anymore about these extreme phenomena like the violent video games and the addiction. I'm more interested in the average player and their experiences.
I find as well that a lot of the time that the people who have written about, say, the usual video game violence and all those kind of things, their majority of the time they're not gamers. And I know that we have a certain bias because we are gamers and it has always been part of our life, but I do think that helps you at least understand the landscape of gaming in general. I definitely would like to see more studies done into mental health and the connections between both, because there's so many, it's a multifaceted topic in general. I think there's just a statistic that usually is kind of brought out. It's like 1 in 4 people are affected by mental health issues. I disagree with that. I think everyone is affected by mental health issues at some point in their life. So I don't think that that's like, so I feel as well that it's between actually breaking down mental health stigma and also tackling not having to tackle the same subjects over and over again, like violence in video games, because like you said, we are beyond that. We know that this is already a conversation that has had a million times before. Ave, I want to talk to you about yourself and how this year has treated you in terms of mental health. How has it actually been for you?
So it's been interesting. Keeping to myself in my day-to-day and staying home is not a huge chore for me, but not having outlets to kind of break up the monotony, kind of do low stakes socializing, that stuff has really been challenging. And, a lot of it kind of just builds up and you don't really, it's not that you don't notice it, it's that it's so incremental, that it doesn't really register until you get to some point you're like, why does it feel like this? So for me, it's kind of been everything's fine. And then I have like a week where I'm like, oh my God, everything is not fine. And then that will kind of inform what I do for the next, coming weeks or something. If I can calm down and sit down and think about it. So it has been a unique challenge, I would say. I mean, I don't mean it's a unique challenge like everyone is going through something this year, I would say. But as someone who works from home almost exclusively anyway and lives in standard US suburbia with like, there's no shops to walk to, I have to drive to them. It's been very isolating, and that's kind of I've had to reckon with some parts of my kind of general mental health that I hadn't before this year. So, but I mean, it's a work in progress. It always is for everyone. So
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the same in the sense that I've been working from home in general for the past 4 years. I'm going to my 4th year now. And for me, it wasn't a change really, to be honest. I felt a bit lucky in the sense that I didn't have that massive shock of having to transition from my career in an office or whatever, because I think that for a lot of people whose roles are primarily based in person or whatever, it was a much harder thing to do in terms of the mental aspect. In that respect, I think I was in a better place, but at the same time I found that at the beginning of the year I was doing so well, and I know that we've had conversations away from streaming this, but I was on a roll. I was reading so many books. I was doing great at learning Japanese. Felt like I was getting somewhere. And then suddenly the pandemic hit, and it was like, oh, this is actually, well, first of all, you kind of expect it to kind of go away after a certain period. And also, I think it was because it was new and exciting, not in a good way, but it was like everything was new and fresh, and there was always something happening, all these developments, and it was very distracting. But also, it was a collective distraction, so it was something that we could all relate to, which was so unusual to have a world event like that. Solly, did much change for you at the beginning of the year?
Absolutely. I am one of those office people who suddenly was confined in their home. And it's not even just that I'm an office person. Like, there are parts of my job that take me up and down the country. I regularly would spend days out of the office in meetings with various different people and different agencies, and it was very normal for me to not be in the office but to be out and about doing things. What I would say about that, though, is I know I've shared this with you guys before, but I'm quite happy to share it publicly as well. I'm disabled. I have a condition that impacts my mobility, and I have to say, one of the things I felt when I saw people having to change their routines and change their lives was, oh, okay, you know what it's like to be confined now. Mm-hmm. You know what it's like to not be able to do all of the things you want to do. And I was happy I wouldn't say I was happy, but I was maybe a bit relieved to see that some people were able to empathize with me and my experience a bit more, because as much as my job takes me out and about and all over the place, sometimes that impacts me really negatively.
Yeah, of course. That's
actually
what I think about before, actually, that kind of aspect where people would maybe be able to be more empathetic in that respect, because I don't know if you've found this, but as the year has gone on, I found that people are perhaps getting more aggressive, but maybe it's because we're so stuck and we can't do anything. But do you think overall, has it more negatively affected your mental health this year, or what has changed in that respect, do you think?
I think the pandemic, the having to stay at home, had a positive impact on me, because it meant that I could forego parts of my day that actually weren't necessary for me to fulfill my job. Right. So things like getting up, doing my hair, putting makeup on, I don't have to do that, and that takes time and energy. So I was able to save that and put it back into my job. So in that way, it was good. I will say one thing that was quite interesting is having to go back into the office recently. All of the sort of safety measures that have been put in place aren't necessarily that responsive to the needs of someone with a disability. And I think there's still this big disconnect where businesses might take a one size fits all approach to that health and safety and making sure people are socially distancing and looking after themselves in a shared office space. But there's still, okay, we've done this bit now, we need to take that extra step to make sure that this is inclusive for people. So it's no good telling me to go and use the side door with all the stairs. I need to use the lift, but there's no policy that's been put in place to manage that until I brought it up. And it's that feeling of you've got to fight for something that you actually are entitled to by law can be a bit heavy to manage. So that's not been great, but being at home's been fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, it is kind of tragic though in the way that it takes a pandemic to bring these things up, right, as well. You know, that it takes like a global catastrophe there's so many people who just do not think about how it affects people who just need all these things to be in place for them, and even more so now, like as you say. Do you think in terms of social media in general, that this has given people more energy to put maybe more anger on the internet, or do you think people are more reasonable now that we're living through this pandemic?
I think that the people who are already reasonable to begin with and willing to meet you halfway, I think I don't feel like they necessarily should have had to kind of be publicly much more, I don't know, empathetic and open, but I do feel like that's happened as a response to, I don't know necessarily about, well, so speaking also from, being the American here on this call, like everything about this pandemic also has been hugely politicized, which is a whole other discussion. But it's hugely damaging, but it's also enabled these people who are perhaps coming at it from a less circumspect kind of view, who want to get in there and stir the pot. They do feel empowered to do that. I mean, personally, my experience with social media, it kind of comes and goes. I'm not very consistent about it, but I did have to completely just stop using Facebook. I was back on there for a brief stint to plan a remote birthday party, but that was it, really. And even Twitter, it's like, for me, I kind of treat it almost as a fire and forget. Like, I'll pay attention to what my friends tweet, but if I'm tweeting something that I think even one person will be offended by or decide to troll me about, it's just like, it's out and I'm done, and I'm not even going to come back to it. But yeah, I do think it really has, people have come out of the woodwork because they see this negativity being legitimized, I think, and it's kind of just, it's increased the overall anxiety, I think, for a lot of people, especially people who reside primarily online or make their livings online in whatever capacity.
Yeah, I was reading something, I can't remember exactly where it was. I think it was in it could have been in Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, but I'm currently on binging his books because they're quite good. But it was a thing where they were talking to a psychologist, and years ago, you'd have the usual things being brought up, but the biggest thing these days was all related to social media and how it's causing this intense anxiety, which is essentially ruining our minds. I can't even fathom what it's like as a younger person who is growing up in a world where media is their entire life, right? They've never known anything different. I mean, for us, I feel that we're lucky that we were at a stage where we kind of were in the in-between. Like, it existed, but it wasn't everything. It wasn't everything. We had a point where we didn't have phones. We didn't have mobiles. That makes us sound so old. I know, right, kids?
No, I think I had a friend who explained it in a really, really interesting way, in the sense that kids these days, I don't like using that phrase, but I can't think of a better one at this point. They're almost, their primary self can be developed via these mechanisms of social media, whereas ours weren't. It didn't exist for us. We had to develop a primary self outside of that. And I think it's fair, certainly for myself, I have my authentic self and my real self that I keep to myself. I have like my work self, and then I've got an online persona. All of them have various elements of authenticity, and all of them are true representations of myself, but I can very easily pick the right presentation for the moment and for the situation. Whereas I think young people who develop their sense of self via social media are so shaped by the differing opinions of people on that platform, the algorithm that controls it, and that algorithm isn't necessarily even as far as I'm aware, isn't really controlled anymore. It creates itself, it's self-perpetuating. So like, who's creating, who's helping or hindering these young people in developing their sense of self?
Yeah, and I think as well that particularly this year, because we've had so much extra time on our hands, I found that around March was when everything started to pick up, and I noticed so many more people on my streams, in my Twitter feeds or whatever, and I feel like it's perhaps there's been this massive desensitization to the fact that there are actual people behind social media accounts. And it's kind of scary, actually, because I've witnessed this, particularly now since I joined TikTok for the crack. But I've just noticed that they don't treat you like people anymore. It's strange. And I wonder, for those who have been a part of social media during this year, which as part of their formative years, let's just say they're going to, this is the year that, how are they going to react when they have to jump into the real world? How are they going to live as adults? I'm fascinated to see this new generation in general come up. Have you experienced any of that strangeness, Ave, online, where it's kind of just been a bit skewed, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's kind of tough to say. I think they'll be fine, but the fact is that the norm is going to continue to shift even regardless of, you know, what continues to unfold with the current state of the world and with the pandemic. I mean, working with younger people, you know, in a primarily remote work setting right now, like I feel like at least these people that I've worked with, you know, they're able to decouple, or perhaps maybe it's not even that they're decoupling it. Maybe it's like having those different aspects of your like authentic self. Like there is an online work aspect and an online play aspect. And to a degree, I feel like I've kind of forced myself into that as well, being now a manager of a team where I have people that I was, you know, friends with, you know, before I was their boss. So I've kind of had to split that. I think kids will be okay, I guess, but it's going to be different. And for us, I mean, I'm like a cusp millennial. So like for me, certainly, I'm sure in 5 years, what's normal is going to look like a complete abandonment of values or something. But like the fact is, it probably won't be. It'll just be a different way of looking at things. I just don't think anyone expected really the monkey wrench that is the pandemic to kind of grossly accelerate the kind of move to more aspects of life being primarily online.
Maybe we're just old.
I mean,
I was just about to say, like, I think what I sort of said earlier is very much rooted in not a terrible fear, but a fear that at some point I'm gonna look at something that's happening in the world and I'm gonna go, oh dear, I don't really get that.
Yep.
Whereas at the minute, I'm very much in a place where it's like, no, I understand this. And people come to me for help and support in like IT stuff. And I'm sort of sat there going like, oh, okay, you know, and I will help them. I don't ever take the mick out of them for it, but I never want to be them.
Yeah, I've had a few moments where I've been like, well, what is happening here? But I try to catch myself and be like, hold up, like, they're not you. It's probably fine. Just chill.
I think, in fairness, my mom thinks I'm still a miracle worker when I change the HDMI from 1 to 2.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm definitely going to get to that stage, especially with my nephews, because they're and you know, they grow up with having iPads in front of them, and they're probably going to be extreme programmers or something, and I'll just be like, how do I switch the channel? I just feel like it's going to totally change. And I know it does feel, you know, I feel like, you know, you're getting old when you have to refer to young people as,
yeah.
But I know that we were also young, and we were probably also irritating. So maybe we still are. So I think that I just feel, to be honest, I just feel sorry, because I'm sure they don't feel sorry for me, but I just feel like they have such a hard deal now because of this societal pressure.
I think that's absolutely true.
And especially with social media, because the biggest thing, well, actually, it was quite stressful growing up when I had Bebo, and you had to pick I think your
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Or like MySpace and your top 8 friends.
Yeah.
The emotional pressure of having to be like, sorry, Frank, you don't make the cut anymore.
I know, it's devastating.
Brutal.
It was so brutal, and especially with Bebo as well, you had only a certain amount of hearts to give out to people. So, you know, you have to be pretty selective of what it's kind of crazy though how that we have developed that far along in terms of social media. I know for me in general, because I suppose I have a more public facing persona that I have and I'll have for quite a long time. So I find more difficult to pull away from it, because people, but the problem is people are watching you, which is awful. It's like, and they also feel like they know everything about you, right? Which is kind of a bit, it turns
and they know what's best for you too.
And they know what's best for you. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yep.
There was something I read recently, and it wasn't even that they know you. It was that whatever you present at any point on the internet, I'll have to try and figure out where I found this. It was whatever you present at any point you are on the internet is in the present moment. So even if you've said something 5 years ago and that was on the internet, and you said something that was problematic, the internet isn't very forgiving in terms of allowing people to change. And so you might have come to I know I certainly would have said things when I was younger that I would never say now, because I've grown and developed as a human being, and I have empathy now, and I understand that words hurt other people and that's not okay. But back when I was 15, I didn't give a shit. I didn't care, like, you know, and the internet doesn't allow you to do that. That moment is then immortalized forever, and people view it as if that's you today.
Yes.
And I do think that's an issue.
It's a massive issue. Funny enough, I'm listening to John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. So far, it's really good. I'm listening via audiobook, and it delves exactly into that. You know, it's what was the word, like a kangaroo court, that everyone just is a judge all of a sudden. And you wonder, okay, so if stuff comes up about you that's really bad, right? How far, you can't put a time frame on it, right? How far can you go back before, how when is this character development? You know what I mean? When does this transition come from, I suppose if you address it and have proven, I suppose, in respect that you are not that person anymore, and you've done stuff to rectify, but then how bad is bad? You know, it was a really interesting example, loads of interesting examples within the book where the people he's talking about are very much publicly shamed, and you had one half who were saying, oh yeah, it's okay, but then there was a vast majority just piling on, and piling on is like one of the words of 2020, along with along with unprecedented. There's like a whole checklist. Bingo, we should do bingo.
We should do bingo, yeah.
But I wonder, is it worth it? As in the sense that I just don't think it can be useful to raise awareness of something, but actually acting like a judge on social media doesn't really do anything. It just creates chaos, ultimate chaos. And I find that as well, that people often jump onto causes that they don't actually believe in, but they see that other people are jumping onto it. They're like, well, I mean, I guess I should contribute it because this is what everyone else is doing.
Well, one of the words that so my master's was in criminology. Interesting link to violent video games. Not really sure how I got there, but my master's was in criminology and in criminal justice services and how they work. And one of the words that is constantly brought up, especially in terms of sentencing people for a crime they did, is the term proportionate. Is their sentence proportionate to the crime they committed? And I think when you look at that in practice in an actual court, in a criminal justice system, you've got a whole list of guidelines that a judge has to go through where they say, okay, well, say someone nicked something from a shop. Well, you nick something from a shop, which is bad, but then you also threatened the cashier, which is even worse. So you get a worse sentence and stuff like that. Whereas on the world of social media, I very, very rarely see proportionality. And if I do, it's hard to see it.
Yeah.
Because the responses are so emotional and come from such a place of hurt, which makes sense. But it's sort of like that judgment of people who don't necessarily have context, they don't necessarily have background, they don't necessarily see how the person's changed, they don't have a list of guidelines that help them make a decision about whether the punishment or the sentence, if you like, is proportionate to the crime that was committed. And I just think it's really interesting to sort of sit and compare the court of social media to the actual criminal justice courts in that respect.
Yeah, I think it relates back as well to, as I was mentioning earlier, the desensitization. It reminds me of a recent post that I saw on TikTok where this person was duetting someone who said something off color, and the person deleted their video, and underneath the video responded and said, you're 100% right, I'm so sorry, you know, what I said was wrong, whatever. And I've learned from this, thank you so much for bringing it up, you know, I appreciate it. But underneath those comments, everyone was like, that's not good enough. And it's kind of like, what else are you looking for? You know, what is a good apology? When is apology an apology? And because there's obviously fake apologies, right? Which are very obviously phrased in a way that is super clear that it's a non-apology. But
they appropriate blame away from the individual, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't, with those though, I was just looking at it going, this girl has apologized. We can move on with our lives. And I don't really think you care that much. I don't really think you actually care that, you know, you're that passionate about this comment or whatever, you know. It is kind of
love to feel outraged, but they also love to feel that they are correct to feel that way.
Yes.
It's like a stimulus, isn't it?
It is a stimulus. Yeah.
So if you had a choice, Ave, actually, would you be on social media?
I would, but only really, like, for me, it would only really be to share music. As it happens, being less prolific these days has kind of dampened that. If I could, like, I mean, I don't log into Facebook, but I do not feel that I'm in a place that I can just delete my account. If I could, that would be the first thing I would do. I would get rid of that, And if I could more reliably force myself to use Twitter in a way where I'm only engaging with people that I want to engage with, then no problems. But honestly, if the choice was you can get rid of social media with no consequences, or you can maintain it for whatever purpose, like if I had to make that binary choice, I would just get rid of it all. Honestly.
Yeah. It kind of gets to a situation where if it's affecting your mental health really badly, which it did mine this year, actually got really, really bad. I was so angry and ragey, and I could feel it. I could feel it taking over my entire body. When that you're almost shaking with anger, you're furious. And I was channeling this rage into my tweets, and I just could feel it going, this is going downhill for me. I can totally sense that I'm actually going to lose the plot here, and I need to pull myself away from that. And that was kind of the turning point for me, where I had to change up my strategy in terms of social media. And kind of like the same, if I had a choice to get rid of it, I would. But a lot of my career has been not built on social media, but it's useful for connections. But I think that in the book I'm reading, actually, that I mentioned earlier, Digital Minimalism, which we might put in the show notes.
Let's put in the show notes. We'll put it in the show notes.
But in that book, it's the way he describes it makes so much sense, because his premise is that he has never famously owned any social media account, this professor. And he says that Twitter is like a slot machine, and it is, because when you're refreshing the feed, you pull it down like a slot machine, and you mightn't get what you want with it. It might be okay, it might be, but you still want to do it because you're like, oh, what can I see next? And it's built on addiction. That's what all social media platforms are. One of the biggest flaws with TikTok, I've noticed, that is that you cannot turn off your notifications for individual posts. It is the most irritating thing ever invented. So you have to see this red notification. It's infuriating. But
I have, sorry, carry on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, I have a tablet. Before I got my gaming PC, I had this tablet so I could watch YouTube and shit. And I watch it in bed, so I would lay it down beside the bed and go to sleep. And my partner one day was like, you do realize it buzzes in the night? And I went, what? And it, yeah. The vibration, like the notifications come through and it vibrates in the night and it wakes me up. And I was like, okay. So I had a look and I tried to turn off the notifications and put this tablet on silent. It did not have that function.
Whoa.
It does not have the function to silence those notifications. The only option I have is to go into all of those applications and turn off the notifications from the app. And I think that's a huge problem.
I think it says a lot about
that software. I think that is terrible.
That is pretty bad, actually, because that feels like a basic requirement.
It feels like, it's like, as I was sat there, I got kind of outraged because it was late as well, so I was tired. And I was kind of outraged that this isn't for me, because if it was for me, it would be easy. There would be a button for me to turn all of this stuff off. So this product, or whatever, the software in this product isn't actually built for me. This is built for people trying to get my attention and trying to part me from my money, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what everyone's trying to do. And that made me really angry. Conned, like I felt duped by it.
And once you notice these things, they're everywhere. Those little things that are just taken over what is inbuilt into our lives. And this reminds me of, my other half reminded me of this. I don't have my phone next to me, so I'm going to have to demonstrate using this seaweed packet. It's in the shape of a rectangle. I know whoever's listening to this, it's in the shape of a rectangle, right? So let's hypothetically say this rectangle is a TikTok screen. So they've built it in a way that your thumb is in the perfect placement to do hearts, comments, shares, and the bottom of the screen, because they know that it's like an L, and they have done it so much that it's exactly replicated to that point. And it's amazing how we've become so accepting of applications that feed off our needs and desires and this addictive service. It's a fascinating concept to me. In terms of social media mental health, I mean, we could go on about what
well, it's sorry, just to really round off the conversation, because you guys both said that you would just delete all of yours. I wouldn't.
Oh, right.
And I'll tell you for why.
Yes.
I use my social media. I deliberately manipulate as much as I can my own social media platforms to make sure they serve me. And I've put a lot of effort into doing that. So my Facebook is the only place where I would have people from like work or people from my family. That's their space where I can share family photos or photos of nights out or whatever. Whereas Twitter, I don't have my picture on Twitter. I don't use my name on Twitter. Like, I have created a little space for me to be very vocal and say whatever it is I want to say. But also, I'm very accepting of, but equally aware of, the echo chamber I create in that social media. So I follow people that I want to follow and that I care about their opinions, and I block people whose opinions I don't care about and who I don't want to converse with. Because actually, as much as it's my space, that's my space on the internet. And if I don't want to use it for a debate or a dialogue or a conversation, I don't have to. So that's how I make it work for me. So I think you see a lot of, you know, and I don't follow lots of politicians or big celebrities or anything like that, because I'm just not interested. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in making genuine human connections with other people. That's what I try and do.
Yeah, and I think that's a kind of as well. I mean, as much as I would get rid of the majority of one, the one that I would probably treasure the most these days would probably be Discord, because it's one where you can't you know, you're, unless it's hard enough to I suppose, well, I guess there are loads of trolls depending on what kind of server you're in, but I feel like, you know, like at a community server you feel pretty safe because it's your community.
Yeah.
For sure. Actually, like, Discord was something that I specifically made a note to mention. Like, for me right now, well, so prior to any sort of lockdown, the way I would get very casual social interaction, maybe with acquaintances, but not necessarily with people who I felt obligated to be in like a give-take friendship with, was like my local pub. And lacking that, which RIP, my local pub, they closed because of the lockdown. It's really sad. That was a very sad moment to learn that. But Discord has kind of in a way become that, because I've kind of like curated some communities. Like, I have my own, of course, I'm part of this community. There are other communities that I'm part of, and like, they all have their different vibes, and it's kind of like where I can go to be casually friendly with people in a not like not in a setting where it's like, I don't know, it feels more permanent, and maybe oppressive is a strong word, but like, you know, on actual social networks. But like, being in Discord, it just feels like you're chilling at a hangout with friends. I guess, again, probably depends on the Discords you're a part of, but you know, that's what has become for me anyway. Like, it's been a pretty big lifeline for me in the past few months.
I think a big thing with Discord, and what I really like about Discord, is that you, as soon as you enter it, you get hit with the boundaries of that community that you are making a choice to engage with or not. If you don't like it, you can leave. Whereas when you're on Twitter and Facebook, you see what the algorithm tells you you're going to see. There is no, you can't buy in with a contract, like a social contract where you say, I promise I won't do this, this and this. You technically do on Twitter and Facebook and that, because you sign the terms and conditions. But let's be honest, who's going to read 380 pages of those terms and conditions that aren't actually in place to protect the individual? Whereas on a Discord, it's very much like, please don't be racist, please don't be sexist, don't do this, don't do it. You know, it's very clear and it's very accessible and human. And I think that's why Discord's so successful.
Yeah, I think as well, I know that Reddit is totally bananas and a completely other beast to itself. But I do like the way that, at least with subreddits, they also have their sub rules. You know, there's like individual sections to each subreddit, and if you don't adhere to them, then see ya, you're gone. But I think as well, what I really particularly like about Discord is, I mean, the three of us, for example, our friendship has vastly developed because we have the opportunity to do three things. So we have the opportunity to do this voice call, we have the opportunity to hear each other's voices, and also to text as well, if we're not in the mood to do the other two, which is really great. And we can also mute things, so if we need a break, it's not going to be a situation, it's like, where are you? It's like there are other people in the group who you can talk to as well, you know. It's kind of one of those, I think that's kind of the difference, I suppose, between other social medias like Twitter as well. As much as I used to love Twitter as a young journalist, I find that Twitter is kind of stiff though, in terms of that friendship development.
Yes.
And it's not the same as Discord. Do you think, Ave, that in terms of, because you mentioned this, I'm curious. So you said that if you had something for an outlet for music, right? So what would be the best one for you to do that, do you think?
I mean, that's a tough one. I really just use Twitter because it's ubiquitous. And again, I can kind of just fire and forget. I mean, if I was active in a community of musicians, I mean, for me, just some context, I guess, for others, like I consider myself a serious musician, and I compose music, I sell albums, but I don't like promote them. I don't perform. It's a thing I like to do. And if other people enjoy it, then awesome. Yeah. Is basically where I am with that. So, you know, in an ideal world, if I was in a community of musicians, just using something like SoundCloud would would be,
Mhm.
great. Like staying within that framework. Discord is great for it too. Again, you want to find a community that's like built for it for sure. But yeah, I would say in a perfect world, something SoundCloud like. I love Bandcamp. That's where I put most of my stuff. But SoundCloud does have more, I guess, a community feel to it, or community potential, maybe I should say, because I am not super hooked into the community there these days. But yeah.
Yeah, I haven't actually ever used SoundCloud properly as a community, but I know that anytime they have a functionality where I think it's like a shuffle. You're like, did you like this sound? Maybe you like this sound.
Yeah.
I'm like, I do like this sound. Thank you very much, SoundCloud, so, I really like that aspect to it. So, but it's with SoundCloud in general as well. I would presume it's majority musician / podcast, right? Those are the kind of two that over.
That's been my experience, yeah. And yeah, you do, like, you find music, people will stumble onto your stuff because of how you tagged it might be similar to something else. So, but again, it's very, it's it's definitely not curated, like deliberately curated, but it kind of self-curates, I guess, in a way.
I like the fact that in this world that we are actually able to retreat to these sub social medias too. Like obviously Discord isn't small, right? It's not
Right.
small. I mean, it's well known within the gaming community for the majority. Other people think, I always just explain it as it's like Slack but fun.
I always describe it as like, I'm like, it's like Slack.
And they're like, oh, Slack, yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, there's so much potential with Discord in general. Like you have so many different, as you said, sub communities. That I was part of an artist community, and they had just everything category broken down really nicely, and it's a really nice interface to work with. Obviously, it takes a bit more effort if you've never seen the thing before, and it's the most terrifying thing you've ever met. But if you use Slack, you'll be fine. It's just you'll be absolutely grand. But moving on to our next one, I just want to talk about, I suppose, games that actually deal with mental health, or have maybe helped with your own. Solly, can you think of any games that deal with mental health that you've played or that you know of?
So I will put a link to the article that I'm about to reference in the show notes if anyone does want it. But I read this article by a clinical psychologist called Kelli Dunlap. She is on Twitter. Shout her out, just to shout her out. But yeah, so number one, she has a blog series about mental health in games and references things like anxiety in games, depression in games. And that's very accessible. That's on her website and it's brilliant. But she also did a sort of research paper on portrayals of mental health in games, and she picked out two games in particular. I thought they were both really interesting. So there was this idea of a negative portrayal of mental health. The one she picked was Batman Arkham Asylum. And, the premise is you're going through an asylum, which is an extremely outdated term that we would not use anymore to refer to an institution where people are treated in relation to their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And the characters within that are called things like freaks, psychos. The portrayals of very serious mental health problems make these people out, or make the characters out to be negative and dangerous, that's not a realistic portrayal of mental health at all. And in fact, it got me thinking about Phasmophobia, which is a new game, and how one of the areas in Phasmophobia is called an asylum.
I was just thinking about that, yeah.
And the idea that asylum is now intrinsically linked to the concept of horror is problematic. And there are moves away from that. Like I say, asylum is a very outdated term, but it still holds that connotation, and people still use it for the horror effect. Which I think is an issue. By contrast, one of the more positive portrayals she talks about is Telltale's Walking Dead, and the way it portrays trauma and players' reaction to trauma. So obviously, as part of that game, you as a player have to make choices that then impact other people, and you see the little tagline that says so and so will remember this, which makes you invest in that. You invest in that social interaction with this character, and you can then, at the end of whatever episode it is, you can then see and compare yourself in what your choices were to the choices of other people, which places you as a player in a community of some respect. And I think it must be interesting for people to look at those stats and go, oh, I picked that, and then all these other people picked that.
Yeah.
And all you can do is think, well, what does that say about me? Because you made the choice. That was your decision. And one of the things she mentions in the article as well is the way it pans in Telltale from first person, which is where the player is doing the action, and then pulls the player out into a third person view for a cutscene. But as part of that cutscene, the player no longer has any control. They just have to watch their choice unfold. So they lose that control element in that scenario. And I think that's a really interesting way to play on people's empathy and their reaction to different situations.
I know when I was playing Telltale's Walking Dead, and in fact the majority of their games, anytime it came up on the screen that's like so and so, remember that, I was like, oh no. I was like, oh no, this is not what I meant for it to happen at all. But I think in general, The Walking Dead in the comics, which I actually have on my shelf behind me, which I'm rereading weirdly at the moment, it is, as you said, it's really an immersive experience where you are the person making all of these decisions. I think that's what actually kind of just ties into video games in general, for where the majority of the times it is you who has to make, unless it's a linear plot, then you've only a set path. But with the more games that have come out that have these branching storylines or multiple endings or whatever, it is on you. It's funny because it's just kind of like, it adds that extra stress, but also it gives you more, well, depending on how you're feeling, but I feel it also adds a layer of empathy. I know for me, it's impossible. I find it extremely hard to play a bad character. If I've made the option, I know that I just can't do it. I've tried so far. Well, Abe, do you have this?
So I generally don't play, like, especially in a single player game, like my inclination isn't to be a dick, but like if another character rubs me the wrong way, I will be bad just to that one guy.
But what a safe place to do that, though. That's the thing. It's video games give you a safe, maybe not an entirely safe, but a safer place,
right, to
sort of be like, do I want to be a dick? Yes or no? And I think that's a good thing about them.
Yeah,
they do give you that choice.
It kind of reminds me recently of when I'm obviously playing my time at Portia, and your rival Higgins, right, was just being a dick to me. And then everyone was just like, duel him, and I was like, yeah, I will fight him. And it's kind of like, it's like you're saying, it is a safer place, certainly. Would you not rather be in a video game doing this than out in the world doing that? So it's definitely much better to take that. Plus Higgins, I mean, he deserved it. He was
there you go, exactly. And Higgins isn't real, so
that's right.
Like, that's the key thing.
I feel like he's real. He's attacking my emotions.
Of course.
I do want to do a really quick shout out for games that deal with mental health. It's not like explicitly about mental health, but I've been playing through Tell Me Why.
Oh, what's that?
It's from Dontnod, so the studio that did the Life is Strange games. So you play as two twins who experienced a pretty brutal childhood trauma together, both like in the long term being raised by a troubled mother, and the aftermath after their mother dies, they end up going separate routes for their life. I don't want to give any spoilers because if it's new enough, and then if people want to play it, but the game bounces between the two twins, and it doesn't explicitly say like, play this how you think this twin might play it, but it really, so one of the characters, this isn't really a spoiler, is a transgender character. So and I would say maybe it's not a perfect treatment of it, but it's given me more food for thought as far as the mental state of someone who might be forced to live a life as someone that they are not.
Yes.
So that was something that popped into my head earlier, and I wanted to make a mention of it because I do think that was because it's not so much, I guess it's giving me more education into the possible thoughts or places that someone might be, whereas maybe I would have been oblivious to it before. I don't know. It's been really interesting. I also have not finished it because it is quite heavy, and I can only play it in little chunks. This is not a light game, kids.
Yeah.
But I would recommend it. I don't want to say it's exactly like the Walking Dead example, but it sounds pretty similar because you are making choices as that person, but then like your choices are made and then you might be switched over to the twin and see how the person you were just acting as plays those choices out, and then you might be like, oh shit.
That's really fascinating. When did this game come out?
It came out, I want to say in like early September. It's on
this
game.
year. Oh
yeah, it's pretty recent. It surprised me completely. It released as episodic, but it was already done. Like they just spaced the episodes out like over a few weeks. It's like 3 episodes. It's been pretty interesting. Also, I just love their aesthetic and their music choice in their games too. It's very nostalgic, late 90s teenage kind of zone.
That's what I
So-
found just in general with Life is Strange, where it
Oh,
was
yeah.
like the ultimate hipster game.
Oh, I
Yeah.
loved it. I loved the first one. I was like,
When-
chef's kiss.
also, when D&D appeared within the game, I was just like, what is this doing in here?
Here we go. Here we go.
That sounds like actually that game sounds right up my alley, because I have played all of the Life is Strange games. They haven't finished Life is Strange 2 as far as I know. I think there's like 3 episodes out. Anyway, that game and that Life is Strange 2 irritated me for
Did it. I haven't played it yet. I loved the first, and I actually really liked Before the Storm. But,
yeah, that's great too. The second one, there's one character in it and he just drives me up the walls. He's ruining it for me. But the aesthetic though in general, I really like it. So I definitely must check that game out.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. Like I said, I'm not sure how consistently sensitive it'll be, like across all 3 episodes. I'm about halfway through the entire game, but it seems to want to be sensitive, and it is trying to present things from an angle that is natural for the character, but also that I think the average, well, I say average, that's not really fair because it's not true, but maybe the average person as far as mass media is concerned, how like present them with such scenarios and feelings that they might not normally have to deal with, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, because that reminds me of a game that actually had an Irish version of it. Funny enough, one of the few games that I was playing recently, called If Found, which is actually based in Ireland, but that also deals with if I remember, because I haven't finished as well, I'm pretty sure it's a trans story. It's been a while since I've been, but you're right. I mean, these games anyway are important to understand that this is how we feel within ourselves, or how we can feel within ourselves. I'm just trying to think of games. Another game that I think that actually dealt extremely well with mental health is Celeste. I don't know if you've played it.
I had that on my list.
Oh, you have it on your beautiful long list.
There you go.
Yeah, no, Celeste is one of those games where it stood out to me so well, because when I think of it, I associate it as a mental health game. Not in the sense that it's, trying to strive to be your therapist or anything, but it's one of those things that it's a very hard game. It's a very hard platformer, and I usually don't play platformers because I'm just terrible at them. I'm just naturally bad at them. But with this game, the way the plot went, first of all, the music is absolutely stunning. So I know, Abe, when you finally do get it.
Agree. I've played the first, I played it for like a couple of hours, but I didn't have the time to sink into it at the time. So
it's super hard. But what I loved about it was the story itself dealt with mental health magnificently well. There's one part where you have to do a breathing exercise, and it just was like idyllic. Not only that, in terms of the actual gameplay, it was one of those things where, like I said, I'm terrible at platforming, but it gave you so many accessibility options, but never punished you for wanting to use them, which I felt was really, really great. And that would definitely be probably in one of my top games that deals with mental health well, because I think, like Solly, you were saying earlier, you can do it pretty bad.
You can do it badly. You can do it really badly.
Yeah, and it can just turn into this absolute mess. Or you can feel, it can even go in the opposite way, where they're just trying to cater too much to it, right? So it's kind of like they make it their obvious thing, like they just focus it, they like
it becomes a presentation and less of an interactive experience.
Exactly, like they might as well take out a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
List out these full things. Yeah, so there is definitely a balance with that. Solly, in terms of games that have helped your own mental health, what do you think stands out to you the most?
What a question. That's
I know.
quite far-reaching, isn't it? For me, so again, let's be transparent, why not? So I suffer with anxiety, and that is rooted in a desire to control my surroundings and what's happening in my life. So when I get to a place where I'm really struggling with that and I feel I have very little control, I go for a game that gives me all of the control I could possibly ask for, which tends to go towards sandbox games that don't punish the player for not doing certain things. So again, I'll hark back to my old faithful ESO, but then you've got games like Stardew Valley, where about the only thing you get punished for in Stardew Valley is staying in the mine too long. Everything else is completely open choice. You can choose whatever you like to do. You as a character are not punished for it, and I think that's really important. And I sort of just sit, if I want to get to a point where it's like, right, I want to play one of these games, I'll stick some lo-fi music on in the background and just do whatever I like. And it's that choice, giving me back a choice is what I look for in terms of managing my mental health.
I think that's an excellent choice, because as well it reminds me of, games that just don't punish you, right? So in my time of Portia, which I think I've mentioned nearly on every single podcast now because I'm just obsessed with
Good
it.
one.
It's so good, but it's just, okay, so you have Higgins, who we mentioned earlier, who just irritates me, but you have a situation where you can, well, okay, so what happens in Stardew is obviously you're punished in the mines and you lose your stuff, which is kind of annoying. But if you can go to 3 o'clock in the morning and you just fall over and faint, and the next morning everything's fine, your health is just back and it's as if it never happened. And I really love that aspect of it, because you're right, these kind of worlds where you don't feel like you're going to be punished for something can contribute greatly. I wonder, would it be, I guess it depends on what type of gamer you are, right? Because some people let off steam by going hardcore into, I know, fighting games or super hard games, or they're personally not for me for releasing steam. I feel like I just get more rage quitty.
It's too stressful.
It's quite stressful.
I actually find bullet hell shooters to be one of my ways to relax.
Okay.
So I just like any game where I can get into like a flow state, and everything kind of just falls away. So puzzle games too, but yeah, I love a bullet hell. People are like, how can you just, I'm like, I gotta crank it all the way up to the highest difficulty, and it doesn't matter if I die 1,000 times. It's just like you just zone out. So,
rinse, repeat.
Yeah, it's just kind of it's almost like a meditation in a way.
Yeah, no, well, I guess it is, because it's rhythmic, right? So it's kind of like you have a system. Have you ever played Skyforce? Actually, incidentally, speaking of bullet type games,
I have not played Skyforce.
No, you know what? Just don't listen to me, because I don't want to add again another game to your long list.
My massive list. Yeah, no, my favorite of all time, I have not played in many years, is called Mars Matrix, and it was for the Dreamcast. And I've been waiting for there to be someone who's like, oh, we'll just release a botched emulated version onto the Switch. I'm like craving it, but but yeah, I don't know. Like I also like open exploration games, but I still like to get into that kind of flow, because if not, then the purpose isn't being served, and I'm thinking about other stuff. Like I've been playing the crap out of the new Assassin's Creed, as you know, the past few days, but I would not call that it is enjoyable, but it is not a relaxing game, because there are long stretches of like, okay, I've done a bunch of stuff here, but now I got to get from point A to point B or something, and then that's when I come kind of out of the experience. So
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking, because I know that you've been playing so much of Valhalla, and I don't want to spoil it for other people. I know so much, but this is important. So do you feel then, right, so it's a newer game that you don't find it as relaxing, because is that because that you're trying to, because you're such a massive Assassin's Creed fan, right? Is that because you're so aware of you're breaking it down and thinking, is this worthy, and all that? So
maybe for me, like I enjoyed it more once it got past its intro, which if you've played any of the modern Assassin's Creed, anyone listening, you know that the intro is like 5 or 6 hours long. It's basically a mini Assassin's Creed before the rest of the Assassin's Creed, where you learn all the ropes, right? And coming out of that, I feel like I can sink into it, and I can play it for a really long stretch of time, but it really is like when I clean up a quest line, or I knock out most of the important stuff in an area, that's when I'm like, I think I'll go do something else now. Like, that's when I'm most likely to come out of it. Whereas something like if I was playing a Tetris Effect, or again, a bullet hell shooter like Ikaruga or something, like it's fast and it's always a challenge. Like it's kind of like a consistent thing, and that's why it helps me zone out a bit better, maybe.
Yeah, the zoning out is definitely one of those things that is classic of a gamer, I think, just in general. I just can't remember. Is the Tetris Effect the one where you're against people, 99 people?
No, that's Tetris 99, which stresses me way out. And I do like competitive Tetris, but I would not play it to relax, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Tetris Effect is the one. It's VR friendly, but it was done by the same crew who did like Lumines and Rez and not Child of Eden.
Child of Light? No, that's
No, yes, Child of Eden. Maybe something of Eden. I can't remember it. It wasn't as good as Rez. Sorry. You can also see the feet of Rez guy up there on my bookshelf. But Rez is also one of my favorite games. But they redesigned it so the levels have a song tied to it. and visuals to match. And as you drop things, the music matches. Like it's not that the music matches it, you add to the music. And when you do line clears, it'll do these crescendos and stuff. And as you get lines, it'll move to the next stage of the song. So they did this whole, like, it's the synesthesia thing that they're obsessed with in general. So that Tetris Effect is a great one to zone out. It's still great even if you don't have it in VR, but like if you've got a VR headset of any variety, it's like on the PlayStation as well. It's like the whole world falls away and it's just like music and pretty lights and it's chill.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think for me, for my chill zone would not be those type of games at all. So like I'd just be like, I feel like I would have to have, I suppose, a main goal to do with my, like, let's go back to Portia, like to do with my workshop or those kind of things. But obviously different strokes for different folks.
Yeah, I mean, my goal when I'm playing those games is just to enjoy the music and the visuals. Like I started playing Fuser recently, which I was going to stream, but then that whole DMCA thing. But it's literally just a game of mixing music. That's it. And I mean, there are points you can get and there's a campaign, but really you can just sit there and mix music and chill, which is, I guess, in my zone.
And I think that comes back to another point that we spoke now about previously of how many types of games there are out there for everyone, regardless of what you're actually interested in. Solly, are there any other hobbies rather, and that you've been getting more into this year that have helped with, I suppose, distraction in one way?
Maybe not more into. I've been pretty consistent with it. As you can see from my delightful little imposter icon, I made that. I crochet. And again, probably linked to my anxiety. I fidget, linked to my anxiety, but also to my chronic pain condition. I fidget. It's a very natural state for me to be moving about constantly because that's a way that my body manages pain and manages my anxiety. I'm talking a lot about myself, sorry.
No.
But one of the things that I find really helps ease my mind is keeping my hands busy on something automatic. So for me, I've got to a point with my crochet where it's like riding a bike. It's a motor skill now. So I can just let my hands do what they need to do crocheting, and I can have some trash TV on in the background, or I can be listening to some music, and it takes the effort to create. So the little imposter guy, I think it took me about an hour and a half to make, so I can like turf it out all really quickly now. I'm working on a scarf at the minute as well.
You need to do a whole line of them. That's what I'm just thinking.
I need to buy the yarn. I need to buy all the different colors. But yeah, so for me, it's that keeps my hands busy.
Is crocheting something that you learned this year?
No, so I've probably been doing more of it this year. I've sort of gone in like peaks and troughs with it over various times, but I started learning it when I was doing my masters because I was feeling so stressed out by my masters. So I'd sit with article or whatever in front of me, and I would find that I just couldn't keep my hands away from like my face or biting my nails and stuff like that. And I sort of decided, right, we're going to sit and crochet while I'm reading my articles. And that's kind of how it happened. So it's probably been about 5-6 years now that I've been doing it.
It must be as well pretty satisfying to see something come to fruition, right? Because you can clearly see the imposter that you've made here, and it looks great. So
he looks very cute, but also it's a brilliant way. Like Christmas comes around, people's birthdays, people love it. People love getting a blanket or a scarf or a pair of gloves. I've worked on some dragon scale wrist warmers that look like dragon scales. I'll take a picture. Yeah,
that's really cool. I would love to be able to crochet, and I think that's just an excuse on my behalf, not doing it. So
it's because you quite get people being like, people who can knit will say I could never crochet, and people who crochet would say, oh, I could never knit, and it's because there's that because it's a motor skill.
Right.
But if you haven't got either of those motor skills, you can learn one of them, and you will get there. It just takes it's repetition. It is riding a bike.
Or you can just do like me with my adult money and go to Etsy.
You could do that, yeah, too.
Just buy something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really cool though. I love that kind of skill because doing things with your hands is always, I find, very, very rewarding. Ave, what about you? Any other hobbies that you've gone into?
Well, I don't know about hobbies necessarily. I did get really into mahjong. Which is a terrible thing to be into when you're quarantined because it really needs 3 other people. And I have found basically anything that involves assembly, whether it's flat-backed furniture, minis for a board game, that I find all very relaxing. The painting I stress myself out on, so I don't paint them so much. But it's really just been finding activities that can occupy me but don't completely shut everything out around me. I've rearranged my library a few times. That's a big one. No, but I've also jumped back into some language study after. I mean, there was a good several months there where everything seemed like, why even bother? So I just, I couldn't get the drive to do it. But yeah, basically, I would say very low key craft-ish things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to be honest, rearranging books sounds. That's what I'm doing at the moment. Apparently it's a big thing on YouTube as well. Book on.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I find it very therapeutic. I'm gonna have to do these. Redo these soon. This is like language side, but they used to be. They were organized. The Indo-European languages were organized going northwest to southeast. So it was like Icelandic, and then like Irish, and then like Gaelic, and then like Welsh, and then it just went like I don't know. It was so, but people would look and be like, "This is not alphabetical. What is this?" I was like, "Oh, there is a method here." They're like, "Man, you are an absolute nerd." No, yes.
I mean, this is the best place to be a nerd, though, right?
Guilty, yeah.
I love that idea of having those sections, because I find that once I eventually get a house, that's going to be one of the hardest things, is to actually decide, okay, so how exactly am I going to organize this? But to suit myself, obviously, because fuck other people.
Obviously.
So, and their opinions and everything like that. Oh, stop.
Yeah, we're here on this podcast to tell you, fuck your opinions. No, not really.
But seriously, yes.
But a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
But a little bit, yeah.
This is reminding me, actually, you just that one of the players in my D&D campaign got me a mini, which is in the post coming from the US, I think, so should be here in the next weeks. But I'm also terrified of the concept of having to paint it, so I might just let it sit there and stare at it.
I am the same. I have a few minis, and at this point I just have to refuse to go anywhere near a paint shop to get them started, because I think it would just be, I'd sink so much money into it immediately. Yeah. I think I'd be awful at it. I think I'd be really bad at painting them.
They're just, I know they're called minis, but it is so mini.
It is so mini.
Too little. It's too little.
And the detail, you know the way you have details in your head, and then you paint, and it's like, well, this is not what I was trying to do.
Fingers, why couldn't you do what I envisioned?
I know, right? Oh, stop. We actually do need to do a D&D episode anyway.
We do.
Maybe next week. But on to, or fine, just to round off tonight's podcast, I just want to ask you to recommend a game. It doesn't have to be new, but just recommend a game that you'd want to share with people that they should play. Solly, we'll start with you.
Not a video game.
Okay, cool.
But a tabletop role-playing game.
Yes.
That has, I didn't mention it, but I will now, that has an element around mental health in it that I think is very interesting. The mechanics fascinating, and it's called Night's Black Agents. And it's like a European vampire killer gumshoe story. You chase vampires across Europe, and you can make it as horror as you like or not, but one of the mechanics in that game is you have sanity, and once your sanity hits a certain point, your character develops a trauma or an issue, and your character has to play that. And it's fascinating because obviously you have complete freedom to decide what that is going to look like and how that plays out. So it's just an interesting way to put yourself in the mindset of someone who would be struggling with their mental health. I think it's really interesting.
That is really interesting, because I'm just thinking, going back to D&D, how we just add all this trauma onto our characters anyway, so it's interesting to kind of develop this trauma as opposed to come with the trauma.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the purpose, is that it comes to you at some point through the game, and it fundamentally changes how your character functions and how they view the world. And I just think that's fascinating, because it's not very often in D&D you get that level of character development. Is
this a game that you must have, you almost, like, as in you have to have the game to do it? as opposed to D&D where you mightn't necessarily need to have everything to do it, if you know what I mean.
You need like the core playbook just for the mechanics and stuff, but I know the game that I played, the GM, far as I know, sort of came up with many of the ideas himself and was very much able to pitch it according to our reactions to it.
Cool.
So when it seemed pretty obvious that something was not okay for our group, it disappeared and it went away and it wasn't brought back. So it quite often these things depend on the GM and on the players in speaking up and saying, I'm not okay with this or whatever. But that's the beauty of a tabletop role-playing game. You make it what you want.
Exactly.
And it's very easy to do that with this game. The core rule book is important, but other than that,
of course, just for the basic mechanics. I think there's a level as well, we'll probably get into this in a D&D conversation, but there is a level of trust there between the players and the GM that they're going to, I suppose, cater to all the aspects and what you're okay with and not what you're, a good one will understand that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. I love the sound. What's the name of it again?
Night's Black Agents. I'll put a link or something to it in the show notes.
Perfect. And Eve, what about you?
So I was a little torn, but what I'm going to bring up is actually something that I had kind of on the docket for last week, but then it was all Final Fantasy. So what I'm going to recommend is a game that came out, I think only on the PS4, and it came out in mid-September called 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim.
Oh.
It is from Vanillaware, so that would be the team or company that developed Odin Sphere, blanking on the other games, Muramasa, Dragon's Crown. But so it has their hand-drawn art style. It is ostensibly, it's like a mech tactical combat game, but it's not really. It's really a sci-fi visual novel. There's like 13 characters. Those are the 13 Sentinels. And they all hail from different parts of history. There's like multiple timelines. There's like all this time causality stuff. It is wild. But basically, like, the game is you seeing everyone's story, but then piecing together the greater story. And in between, there's some mech combat and stuff. But it starts, and if you are one like me, who as soon as you are playing a anime themed game, whether it's you like non-Japanese developers or Japanese developers, and the tropes start flying, your eyes might roll clear out of your head. But this game kind of plays with them. It sets up all the characters like, this is very obviously this trope, but then as you play, you find out how they are actually a whole person and not just a trope, and how they work with the other people that they've found themselves in this weird sci-fi bizarreness. Also, the art is very good. The music is good. It's weird. But I think as long as you don't mind sitting in and pouring through some on-screen text, anyone can really dig it, as long as they're cool with that. The mech combat is fine. It's cooler once you get out of the tutorial, but that's not necessarily why I would recommend the game.
Right. Yeah. I'm to be honest, a big fan of VNs in general. So I feel like that aspect of it would be totally right up my alley, because I can just read for days.
It's got the branching charts and everything. You get the key at someone else's and you got to go back to a different person's storyline. Yeah, it's all there.
So
but then
good.
Also there's a mech combat game as well if you want it. So.
Yeah, which is I like that kind of adding the two almost genres together. I'm just thinking of I'm such a fan of VNs and just branching storylines. One of my favorites was Steins Gate, which was just, I thought it was so amazing. I still haven't finished Steins Gate 0 because it's all, to be honest, both plots are quite bananas, but I really enjoy how they do it. In terms of a game that I recommend, I was thinking about this too, because I didn't necessarily tie into mental health in general. It was just a game that I wanted to recommend, but I played this recently on stream. Well, not recently. I say recently, but it was like maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
Time is a construct anyway, man.
What is time? But a Short Hike, which I absolutely adored. Yeah. It's probably one of my favorite indie games that I've ever played, because it was just so sweet. It was, but not sweet in a syrupy sort of way, in a sort of an indie way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was clearly made by someone who just has a nice, quirky sense of humor that works. That's not too forced. That's innocent enough, but isn't so innocent that you're like, this person is stupid. It's kind of like, this person has no life experience or anything. It's just like such a simple tale that just really was wholesome. And it was one of those experiences, kind of like, I guess, like Animal Crossing, that you could just go into this little world, which the game itself is only about an hour and a half to 2 hours, so it is very short. But every moment was an absolute delight, and it's kind of rare to come across those games. But I feel like, especially indie games, do those pretty well. And I find that's often actually what the AAA studios in general lack.
Yeah.
Because they're thinking, let's make it big and wonderful
That's
and
right.
huge. And it's like, yeah, but you could actually make a fantastic game that's small.
Substance over quantity.
Exactly. Yeah. But that game, I'm not sure. Let me just check here. I think it was, it's on the PC and on the Switch. On the Switch. There you go.
It is on the Switch. Yeah.
Have you played it yet?
I have been meaning to. I have not gotten around to it. I have it on Epic, and I also bought it as part of that big BLM bundle from earlier in the summer. So.
Oh well, if you have it on Epic, then you're halfway there.
Yeah.
Because that's where I came across it too, and I just really liked how cute it was, and just really, really nice. It was a beautiful way to relax for a few hours. Exactly what I needed for that moment in time. Yeah. And I think that's a good way that we're going to round up episode 5 of the Community Talk Show. Thanks again to Ave. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And also to Solly. Thank you so much.
No worries.
We're going to be back next week with another episode 6. We'll have about 10 episodes or so of this talk show. I really appreciate you all for being here, and we are going to head away for tonight. So, Ihua, Kolasov, Kiemeshiv. Bye for now, guys.